Welcome to Washington, D.C. Hidden Gems. Many of us have a memory of when we first learned about Harriet Tubman. For me, it was when I was a child, while watching a short-lived family television show. I still remember my favorite episode. In that episode, the time travelers, Jeffrey and Bog, land in the old American South and meet Harriet Tubman. The travelers ended up having to set history right by helping Harriet get back on track to the Underground Railroad. I can't travel through time. So how can I or any of us learn more about her now? Fortunately, if you visit or live in Washington, D.C., you can do just that. There are several museums and other institutions that pay respect to her. And there are other ways to know more about the legacy that this brave woman left. I have put together a list that can easily be turned into an itinerary that you can cover in a long weekend or so. Before we cover the list, let's first learn a little bit about Harriet. Tubman was born Araminta Ross in 1822 on the eastern shore of Maryland. She labored in Maryland's tobacco fields, and she witnessed the violence of slavery. When she was a teenager, Harriet was at a dry goods store when an overseer threw a 2-pound weight that hit her and crushed part of her skull. That store is still there in Maryland. The injury likely gave her a form of epilepsy. As a result, she would have splitting headaches and have dreamlike trances. Tubman believed that her trances and visions were God's revelation and evidence of his direct involvement in her life. As depicted so perfectly in the 2020 film, Araminta married John Tubman at 22. She changed her name, taking her mother's first name and her husband's last name. 5 years later, rumors circulated that slave traders were prowling through the eastern shore. Harriet Tubman decided to seize freedom. She fled into the woods and, with the help of some members of the Underground Railroad, walked the 90 miles to Philadelphia where slavery was illegal. There's a link to an excellent timeline of her major life events below in the video description. The Underground Railroad was a loose network of African Americans and whites who helped fugitive slaves escape to a free state or to Canada. Tubman later led about 12 or 13 rescue missions of her own. She freed about 60 to 80 people. She never lost a person, and she won the nickname of Moses for leading so many people to the Promised Land, meaning to their freedom. After the Civil War began, Tubman volunteered to serve as a spy and scout for the Union. She ended up in South Carolina, where she helped lead military missions. Tubman helped guide 3 Union steamboats around Confederate mines and then helped about 750 enslaved people escape with the Federal troops. She was the only woman to lead men into combat during the Civil War. After the war, she moved to New York and was active in campaigning for equal rights for women. She passed away at the age of 90. Tubman's visits to Washington, D.C. were not many, but there were a few and they were quite impactful. I want to share them with you here, in case you want to visit these sites and walk in her footsteps, and think about what she did. Let's start with a little-known connection to Washington politics, which spoke to her commitment to those who are vulnerable. In midlife, Tubman had communications with the Surgeon General, Dr. Joseph K. Barnes, and told him that over twice as many black soldiers were dying as white soldiers. She shed light on the fact that colored hospitals were understaffed and poorly funded. Her frustration erupted in a dictated letter that was published by a New York paper.
I should be glad to write better news to you than this if I could, but how can I when there are dying around me, in the course of every day and night, 20 or 25 men. I truly believe the principal part of them suffer with hunger. Neither the sick nor the well have enough to eat. Brave men die, with tears in their eyes, crying for something to eat. We found great fault with the rebels for their treatment of our prisoners, but it is worse among our friends by whose aid we have fought to put down this rebellion. We could not expect much from our enemies, but from our friends we looked for justice.
Harriet put her words to action. She nursed soldiers in Freedman's Hospital here in Washington. Tubman used home remedies she learned from her mother, such as boiling roots, to treat malignant fever, smallpox, and other infectious diseases. Is Freedman's Hospital still around? It is, and you can still see the site. In 1967, Freedman's Hospital was taken over by Howard University. The former building now houses the Howard University College of Nursing and College of Allied Health Sciences. Tubman also worked briefly at a home for orphans founded by the National Association for the Relief of Destitute Colored Women and Children. During her stay at the orphanage, she restored cleanliness and confidence in an organization that had recently suffered from extreme neglect and political scandal. Thousands of once enslaved people crowded into D.C., desperate for shelter, work, and protection. This shelter was the only foster facility for Black children. Eventually the home moved to 733 Euclid Street, and eventually became the now home of the Emergence Community Arts Collective. You can see it there today. In a little-known story, Tubman also had a very strong influence on an event that took place not too far outside of D.C. Tubman helped John Brown plan his 1859 raid of an arsenal in Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. Brown was captured and sentenced to death. The act of resistance sharpened tensions between the North and South and served as a major catalyst for the Civil War. I have told you about her background, the locations within D.C. where she walked, and now I will tell you how to experience her more directly through the museums and other institutions of D.C. that are charged with protecting her memory and legacy. Let's start with the Library of Congress. Currently on display is the exhibit called "Shall Not Be Denied." The exhibit covers the fight for the women's vote and includes an image of Tubman later in life as she took on the cause of women's suffrage. You can also see it online using the link in the description below. Even better, you can always learn about Tubman anytime through the library's digital archives, which contain a number of photographs available to the public. In this photograph, we see a full-length portrait of Harriet Tubman looking directly at the camera, with folded hands resting on back of an upholstered chair. Here we see Harriet Tubman at midlife. She is seated, turned toward the left. One hand rests on the back of a wooden chair, another rests in her lap. This is a full-length portrait of her seated in a chair, facing front, probably at her home in Auburn, New York. By far, the best place to see multiple Tubman artifacts is the National Museum of African American History and Culture. A highlight is Tubman's silk lace and linen shawl given to her by Queen Victoria. You can also see Harriet's personal hymnal. Other items that you can see at the museum include a brick taken from Tubman's home. There is also silverware from her home as well. You can also find a square handkerchief owned by Tubman. It is made of machine-woven, off-white linen or cotton with cutwork lace edging. One corner of the handkerchief has an additional cutwork motif of a stylized fleur-de-lis. Don't miss one of the most striking photos of the abolitionist, which was discovered in an album owned by Quaker school teacher and abolitionist Emily Howland. There is a link in the description to the museum's entire collection. Use it to plan your next trip there. I don't want you to think that the African American Museum is the only museum where you can celebrate Harriet's legacy. I mentioned earlier that among the many roles Tubman played in life, she was also a spy. Women of color were seldom suspected of carrying secretive information during the war. Civil War spies like Tubman used this to their advantage. The International Spy Museum tells this part of her story. They do so in a permanent exhibit about unexpected spies. When you're there, you can also learn more about how Tubman helped the Union Army raid and rescue 750 enslaved individuals. Want to stand next to Harriet and take a selfie with her? You can do it. Just head over to Madame Tussauds Wax Museum. The famed Wax Museum unveiled Harriet's likeness in 2012, during a ceremony with Tubman's family present. Her 76-year-old great-great-niece said,
"This is the best I have ever seen. It's like she's looking at you. It's like she is watching you."
Harriet's spirit has also been embodied in works of art, such as at the Smithsonian American Art Museum. The museum features this oil painting in its south wing, which is on the first floor. Artist William H. Johnson's work commemorating Tubman is part of the artist's 1945 series, Fighter for Freedom, which illustrated American heroes who fought for equal rights. You don't need to step inside a DC museum to see art that celebrates Harriet. Her image is also found outdoors in DC and beyond on murals. She is painted alongside other African-American icons on the side of the famous Ben's Chili Bowl restaurant. The restaurant itself is also a landmark for its role during the Civil Rights Movement. Just go to their 12th and U Street location and step around to the side wall. There is also a beautiful piece of street art that was done by DC artist, Natural. It shows Tubman on the $20 bill. It's located in the Noma neighborhood. It was created in support of a movement to feature women on U.S. currency. If you are willing to leave DC and drive into Maryland, you can see the famous 3D mural of Harriet. It is on the site of the Harriet Tubman Museum and Educational Center. The mural shows Tubman with her hand outstretched, beckoning the viewer to join her on a journey to freedom. The mural was painted by Michael Rosato, a muralist who lives in Dorchester County, Maryland, where Tubman was born and lived in slavery for more than 25 years. Since we've metaphorically left the confines of the district for a bit, let's go for a road trip. Our first stop is the Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad Visitor Center in Church Creek, Maryland. The Visitor Center offers exhibits and a film about Harriet and her time in Maryland. The center also serves as an orientation center and gateway to the larger Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad's scenic byway. The byway begins on Maryland's eastern shore, about 80 miles east of D.C., then on to Philadelphia. It preserves and interprets the places where Harriet Tubman was born, lived, labored, and where she fled from. Another option that could serve as an adventure is the Underground Railroad Experience Trail at Woodlawn Manor Cultural Park. The trail is meant to evoke the experience of enslaved freedom seekers traveling through Montgomery County on their way to safety in the North. Lastly, I'll leave you with a valuable resource. The National Park Service maintains the Network to Freedom website. The website maintains a database of locations with a verifiable connection to the Underground Railroad. There are currently over 600 locations, part of the network in 40 states, plus Washington, D.C. and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Creating this video has been a labor of love. I hope you have enjoyed it. If so, please like the video and subscribe to the channel to keep us growing. And if there is something I missed in my list, please add it in a comment below so that others can learn from it. Goodbye for now.